All right, so we're talking about forgiveness this morning. But before I dive in too deep, I do want to kind of give a little disclaimer. Okay, it is my heart, and I know Pastor Chip would agree that anything that we share from up here is really just an opportunity for you to take home and dive deeper. Okay. Um, Pastor Chip shared last week on the importance of being able to minister to yourself in the Lord. He talked about submitting yourself to the Lord, drawing near to Him, examining yourself, and working out your salvation. Is a really good kind of prep for really this kind of thing, but also the things that we're going to be continuing to talk about. And I just want to encourage you, if you didn't hear it, it's on YouTube. Go check it out. It is something that is vital for our walk as believers. We have to be able, community is great, and the counsel of many is a great thing, but we've got to be able to just get one-on-one with the Lord and say, Lord, I need to be honest, and I need you to help me work some things out. And so that being said, as we dive into the importance of forgiveness and what happens after forgiveness, that's what I want to talk about. I just want to encourage you to take these things to the Lord, okay? Don't be the kind of Christian that only knows the Lord based on what gets said from up here. Don't do that, okay? Know Him for yourself. Take your word, study it, and know Him for yourself, okay? There's lots of things. I didn't grow up in church. I got saved when I was 14, 15 years old. But even from that time, there are things that I've discovered, I believed wholeheartedly, that don't come from the Bible. They came from someone who said them one day. And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. So know the Lord, know His word for yourself, and that does not exclude everything that's said here today. Okay? Agreed? All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, also one last thing. I want to present some information to you to just take with you. And like I said, dive into a deeper process with the Lord, especially when it comes to forgiveness. We all want to continue to grow and mature. But as I talk about forgiveness, I want you to know that I know forgiveness is a hard thing. And for some of you, it can seem like an impossible thing. And I recognize that. And so as we discuss this, I want you to know this is not a judgment thing, okay? This is Lord, help us be better. We have to be able to maintain our connection with the Lord, and forgiveness or unforgiveness is one of those easy disruptors of our connection, okay? And so even though it's hard, we're gonna press through. I know that some of you probably have experienced terrible things at the hands of others, and forgiveness is difficult. But I want us to come to the place where we know forgiveness is not about making things right; it's about making us whole. Okay, the Lord wants us to be whole. The whole point of the process that we're in as a church body with soul care and inner healing is that we learn to take these things to the Lord, because all of it's impossible without Him anyway. Forgiveness is a supernatural act. It is impossible without the power of the Holy Spirit. So we need to be able to take things to Him. Sound good? I don't know. Some of you guys were like, well, I don't know, Mike. It was never His intention for us to navigate these things on our own, in our own strength. There'd be no point for the sacrifice of Jesus if we could just make it on our own, okay? So we're going to take these things to Him. Sound good? You're like, maybe. We'll see what you say. Okay. All right, so we're going to read a good little chunk of Scripture today, and what I want to do is hopefully just give us, read enough to give us some context and some understanding for Jesus and how He talks about forgiveness and what He modeled with His life. Okay, so if you have your Bibles, we're going to go to Matthew 18, and we're going to read a few verses here, so bear with me as we kind of go through this. We're going to, so Matthew 18, we're going to start in verse 6. It says, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to the man by whom the offenses come. So right away, I want you to understand what he's talking about. Woe to the man by whom the offenses have come, okay? So we're talking about somebody who's offended somebody else in a situation that immediately will either need forgiveness or be without it, okay? Does that make sense so far? We'll keep reading. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off, cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire. Okay, let's go. Let's see. That was verse 9. Let's jump down to verse 15. Moreover, so in addition, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to even hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on the earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Verse 24, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. Okay, so before we go forward, just a couple things from those passages. First of all, so verse 17, if he refuses to hear from them, tell it to the church. If he refuses even to hear from the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. So am I the only one that would read that and be like, okay, if they can't admit to their wrong, then kick them out, give them the boot. Am I the only one that read it that way? Okay. So what's funny about this is there's a lot of this with the church. You know, if you've messed up, and I ask you, hey, you messed up, and you don't admit to it, then I bring it to somebody else, and you still don't admit to it. And we talk to a larger group, and you still don't admit to it. Well, guess what? You're out, buddy. But here's the thing. Who did Jesus hang out with? Yeah. So it says, let them be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. So first of all, Jesus is focused on redemption, okay? And so even in this situation where this person has refused to apologize after these 3 stages of chances, Jesus says, treat them like a tax collector or a heathen. Well, how did Jesus treat those people? He left it like, hey, I want you here. And I understand you don't understand, and it's hard, but I still want you, and I'm going to be around you, okay? So what I want us to get from these verses is that Jesus is interested in redemption, and it is important to him that we not be cast aside because we can't get it right, but that we be brought in and say, hey, okay, I'm gonna meet you where you're at for a minute, okay? And I'm gonna open up. Wouldn't you agree? And if you won't, that's fine. That if someone is in this position where they have refused to apologize for something that they've done, that treating them like a heathen and a tax collector means, okay, let's take a step back and let's just get real basic again, okay? We'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to point that out. Verse 20, it says, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. Who thought that was always a verse about praying together? This verse comes from an idea that there is something more at stake when we're dealing with each other with regard to forgiveness. There's something more at stake, and the Lord wants to be in the midst of what's going on when we have a hard time with each other, okay? He says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Forgiveness is it's a kingdom principle. It is a kingdom reality. And Jesus is letting the disciples know, hey, this is not just like an earthly relationship thing. This is something that goes far above that. And there are spiritual principles at work when we have to deal with forgiveness. And they start and finish in the kingdom. Okay? All right, so we'll keep going. Let's see, that was verse 20. Let's jump down to verse 21, right below. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Peter was already done with somebody. Lord, how many times? 7? Because I gave him 6. Anyways. Jesus said, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle the accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and that payments be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of the servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. And he would not, but he went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved and came and told their master all that had been done. Verse 32, then his master, after he had called him, said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. Then, in case they're wondering, is this just a story or is this for real? Verse 35, he says, So my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. Okay, so this is where it gets a little tough. Forgiveness is a big deal. And I want you to wrestle with this passage because there's a lot of things that Jesus talks about where he uses a parable, he relates it to something else, and it's like, this is kind of like this. And then there's some things that Jesus is very black and white about. Forgiveness is one of those things. Forgiveness is a black and white topic with Jesus. And I want to talk about why forgiveness is important. And so let's just do that before I get myself in trouble. Here we go. Why forgiveness is important. Well, first of all, as we just read, forgiveness is a clear directive from Jesus. Parables like this, the Lord's Prayer, forgive me for my trespasses as I do what? Forgive those. Did I say that? Is it backwards? Did I say that right? Okay. It's when Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, forgiveness was part of it. Hey, forgive me as I forgive others. If it weren't that way, he would have said it. Forgive me, also help me try to do that. But if I can't, it's okay. No, he said, as I'm forgiving others, forgive me. It was a part of that prayer. It was a very clear directive. On the cross, on the cross, Jesus endured everything that he endured, and even on the cross was crying out for their forgiveness. So this is the model that he's giving us. This is not like, Jesus came and became a man for this very reason, so that we could look to him to understand the very difficult challenges that we will face as humans here. And this is what he modeled. Even after everything he endured, going to the cross, on the cross, he was crying out for forgiveness. I want to look at this also. I want to look at his relationship or his dealings with Judas. Judas was one of the 12. So he was pretty close. And he betrayed Jesus. As a matter of fact, before we read the passage we're going to read, Judas was in the room, got his feet washed by Jesus. Pastor Chip says this, and I'd never heard it until he said it, that Judas probably had the coins that he was paid to betray Jesus in his pocket when Jesus washed his feet. Dang, that is messed up. So let's go to Matthew 26. I want to look at this together because, again, if Jesus is our model, then I want to know how he did it. I want to know how he handled it. So Matthew 26, we're going to go to verse 42. So Jesus is praying in the garden, and the disciples should be praying. They fell asleep. And in verse 42, I'm going to pick it up there. It says, again, a second time, he went away and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me, unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." And then Judas walks up, and he's with these guards. In verse 47, it says, "While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him.' Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and he kissed him." And I looked this up. He didn't just give him like a, "Hey, what's up" kind of kiss. This kiss was a very intimate greeting between teacher and disciple. And they did it together. Judas kissed Jesus. Jesus received this kiss from the man that is literally betraying him in this moment. Now, one of the things I didn't say earlier is, I don't know what you've been through. Nobody does, okay? Only you know what you've been through. No one will ever know how it feels to you because it's you. But we can all identify with a feeling. Betrayal really sucks. Can I say that? Can I say sucks in church? I'm sorry. Anyways, really stinks. Is that better? Okay. All right. Betrayal is terrible. Yeah. If you have experienced the sting of betrayal, you know that in this moment, as Judas is approaching, his betrayal is no secret. And he comes and he kisses Jesus on the face and shares this intimate greeting in the act of betrayal. And Jesus receives this kiss, and he says to him in verse 50, "Friend, why have you come?" Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. He didn't say, "How dare you?" He didn't say, "Get away from me." He told Peter, get behind me, Satan. And Peter was just, ignorant. Judas is literally betraying him. And he says, friend, what are you doing? What are you doing? Friend. Jesus, in the face of betrayal, never lets go of forgiveness. He is committed to redemption and forgiveness. And as tough as it is to accept that reality, that is the responsibility that we have as followers. We have to be willing to live in this place of forgiveness. Okay, so why is forgiveness important? It's a clear directive. Forgiveness is freedom from the tormentor. Okay, we read the story, the parable of the man who owed the debt. The man who owed the debt that made his other guy pay him the money was released to the tormentor. That's what he says. And I want you to know, the reason that I'm even speaking about forgiveness is because a few weeks ago, after worship, Jen Webb came up and she talked about how there's some people who are really dealing with unforgiveness, and it was keeping them bound up. And in that moment, the Lord was like, yes, that is actually going on. And I want you to know, listen, if you're going through a tough time and you just feel like stuck, you just feel like, man, why can't I just get over this thing? Why am I on this cycle of just stuckness? You may really want to think about forgiveness. Now, when I say that, don't make yourself feel guilty and be like, yep, gosh, there's so many people I have to. No. I'm talking about there are some of you that have a deep-seated unforgiveness that you really need to just take a look at. Because without it, we are tormented in our minds and in our bodies even. Okay? Unforgiveness gets bound up in our minds and in our bodies. For a long time, most of you guys know this, I worked for treatment centers with people who are struggling with addiction, all kinds, alcohol, any kind of drug, pills, heroin, all kinds of stuff. And so many of those people, listen, I did this for 10 years. So many of those people that came through there had reached this kind of rock bottom in their life. And so many of them, not all of them, so many of them, when they talked about their past, there was always something that happened that they just couldn't let go of. And listen, sure, difficult things happen. I'm not trying to minimize that. But the people that did that, they're off living their life. And it will keep you bound up in your mind and eventually in your body. All right. Let's go to, all right. So forgiveness is important because it's freedom from the tormentor. You don't have to turn there. Hebrews 12. I'm going to go there real quick because I wanted to read this to you guys. Hebrews 12. Verse 14, it says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this become defiled. When we pursue unforgiveness, when we hold on to unforgiveness, there's a root that starts to grow in our hearts. And if we're not careful, it will grow and it will contaminate everything in our minds and in our hearts. Forgiveness is not natural. I said that. Forgiveness, the whole, how many times do I forgive them? 70 times 7. That wasn't like a forgiveness quota thing. It was really that we are called to a life of forgiveness that will not be possible without a supernatural act. Jesus was like, okay, Peter, 70 times 7. Can you count that? And Peter's like, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you won't be able to. It is a supernatural act. Not forgiving someone is agreement with judgment. Judgment for them, but also judgment for you. And here's the trouble with this. There's only one judge, and he is holy, and he is righteous. When I hold on to unforgiveness, and listen, I'm not just talking about other people. If you have not forgiven yourself for your past, for any number of things, you are saying, actually, Jesus, I'm a better judge than you. Step aside. And unfortunately, that's not the reality. We're terrible judges. And if we remove him from that position, then we not only are holding on to judgment over someone, but we're declaring judgment on ourselves. Sorry, is that bad news? I apologize. Yes. A lack of forgiveness will reduce our influence. So, I've told parts of this story before, and I want to be careful. I want you to understand that this kind of stuff happens. And when Chris and I first got married, I was working for a church, and it was we had just planted a church in the Keys. And long story short, there was a disagreement and misunderstanding between myself and the sending pastor of that church plant. There were things that I can say he said that were not okay. There were things that I did that were not okay, like just not listening to the Lord. This is the story where I tell you that we planted the church, and I asked the Lord, dang, why is this not working out? And he was like, you didn't ask me. Okay, so it didn't end up well. And at one point, I was living in Homestead, which is maybe, was it an hour from Key Largo? Yeah. I was living there. We had planted the church in the Keys, and we had this falling out with this pastor. And I drove 45 minutes. Didn't have to be down there, but I drove 45 minutes because I wanted to tell him to his face, you're a liar. Yeah, this is ridiculous. This is Mike back in Florida. This is ridiculous. And I wanted to let him know that how wrong he was, and that he would reap what he sowed. I don't know. I just said crazy things. You just say crazy things. Anyways, fast forward several years later, Chris and I are living in Missouri, and also pray for them. The town we lived in Popper Bluff is the name of the town. That got hit with a terrible tornado. One of our friends' houses got smashed by a tree. Just pray for them. That's kind of craziness. I reached out to them, and it was a flashback to people trying to reach out to us after Helene, And anyways, pray for them. We're living in Popper Bluff, really small town in southeast Missouri. We've been living there for a few years, and we're just like, man, we got to get out of here. This is not, it's time to move on. It was good while we were here, but it's time to move on. But we just felt like stuck. Like, man, I don't know what's next for us. And we're praying, Lord, what is next? And we just couldn't get there. And so one night, it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. The Lord wakes me up, and he's like, you need to get a hold of that pastor, and you need to ask him for forgiveness. And I was like, excuse you? Do you mean I need to tell him he needs my forgiveness? And the Lord was like, no. You need to ask him for forgiveness. And I was like, dang it. I was like, this is not a me thing, because I'm not trying to get up at 4 in the morning to do nothing. I'm not like Pastor Chip. That's like his best time of the day. And so I knew, like, okay, this has to happen. And so I pulled my phone out 3 or 4 in the morning, and I texted him. And I said, hey, listen, I just need you to know I'm sorry. And I handled it wrong. And regardless of whether or not you handled it wrong, I want you to know I'm sorry. And I learned a lot while I was with him. And that's true. I did. I learned a lot. And I told him that. And he texted me back later that morning and just said, man, it was so good to hear from you. I'm sorry too. And it was just a good, like, okay, that's settled. And literally, a year after that, we moved here. And long story short, I get to be with you fine people. But I'm convinced that the Lord, because let me just give you a little bit more background here. When that happened with that church in South Florida, I was disgusted with the church. Disgusted. I didn't want to, this is how far I went. I even told people, listen, I love Jesus and I follow him, but don't call me a Christian. I don't want to be associated with those people. Oh, yeah, it was ridiculous. This is how I am. I'm not anymore. Anyways. And it really, really messed me up inside. And the Lord brought me to this place where he's like, hey, this has to come to an end because we got things to do. And this has to come to an end. And, you know, my heart has always been just to do what is pleasing to him, even if it's hard. And I know that was a turning point for us. And it was a part of my healing also. Because now, listen, the church is messed up, but it is his beautiful bride. And I love the church because he loves the church. Why was I telling you that story? Let's find out. Forgiveness is me choosing, because it is a choice, it is me choosing that I am not going to hold judgment over you. It's me choosing that I'm not going to demand my kind of justice, okay? Because we all have an idea of what that is. They deserve this because of what they've done. Forgiveness is me saying, I'm not the judge who gets to decide that. Forgiveness is me saying, I will not withhold love from you. Forgiveness is my offering of trust to the God whose throne is founded on justice and righteousness. Listen, he cares about justice. He cares about the things that have happened to you, the wrongs that have been wronged against you. I don't know how you say that. Anyways, he cares about those things because his literal throne is justice and righteousness. My forgiveness of people, of myself, is an offering of trust to the God who sits on justice. It is me saying, regardless of what's going on here, I trust you to handle this. Forgiveness is an offering of trust. So, I got a few minutes left, and I just want to cover this real quick. What comes after forgiveness? One of the things that I really want to get straight here is, how many people have ever heard of the idea that if you forgive someone, but you don't trust them, then you really haven't forgiven them? Have anybody heard that before? Okay. Well, listen, I want you to know that forgiveness is not trust. Okay? Trust is separate. Trust is earned. How do I know that? Think about our relationship with the Lord. Salvation is free. We got to work it out. I literally heard Pastor Chip tell me this. We have to work out our salvation. Yes? Forgiveness of our sins is free. Our debt is paid. Can we all agree? Okay, that part is free. Intimacy with the Lord, maturity, that will cost you everything. Growing in trust with the Lord, growing into a relationship where he will trust you to do whatever it is you're called to do, that will cost you everything. Even Jesus had 72 disciples, then he had 12, then he had 3 that were like the inner circle. Only 3 of them got invited to the Mount of Transfiguration. He didn't invite all 12. Even Jesus had levels of relationships with people. And what I want you, everyone here, to know is that you can choose forgiveness and not choose trust. Okay? And I say that because I know that there's a lot of people. I keep picking on the church. I'm sorry. It's not just the church. There's people, regular people too, people who aren't in church, that would manipulate you into believing that you haven't forgiven them because you can't trust them. That's not true. Without forgiveness, there can be no trust, but forgiveness is not trust. For those who engage in the hard work of building trust and cultivating intimacy, there is a reward. That reward is more trust, more intimacy. Okay? So, translate that to our relationships here on earth. Trust and intimacy is earned and cultivated. I can forgive someone, I can choose forgiveness, and also not trust them. If I place no value in earning trust and cultivating intimacy with myself, then I will attract people who place no value in earning trust and building intimacy. If you are surrounded by people who constantly disrespect you, who can't seem to understand your boundaries, who don't care when it makes you uncomfortable or puts you out, unfortunately, don't get mad at me. Unfortunately, you have allowed those people in your life. Ugh, I'm sorry. Listen, if I live my life with no value for building trust and building intimacy, then those are the people that will walk into my life. Those are the people that'll hang around. Now, I'm not saying cut everybody off and give them the boot. Some of you guys are like, ooh, I can't wait. What I'm saying is Jesus was focused on redemption. Forgiveness was a way of life for him. It wasn't like a choice that he made on a day-to-day, like maybe or maybe not. It was a lifestyle for him. But he also gave an opportunity for people to build trust and build intimacy. And he continues to do that with you and I. In Psalm 51, this is David's prayer after everything went down with Bathsheba. And in Psalm 51, David acknowledges his need for forgiveness. And he actually says, you and you alone have I sinned against. Even though he murdered Bathsheba's husband, had a baby. I mean, there's countless people that he messed with. I mean, there was a trail of craziness behind David's actions. But he gets to this place in this psalm where he says, you and you alone have I sinned against. Is that psalm? Yeah, here we go. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Verse 3, for I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. One more. Against you, you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight, that you may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. David knew that forgiveness is a vertical issue. It is an issue that happens between God and myself, the Father and I. Jesus commanded us to forgive, and I don't want to have an earthly response to something that is between him and I. Nothing is worth breaking that connection. But I can promise you that the primary goal of the enemy is to get you to believe that there is something worth breaking your connection, and it's how they wronged you. That's worth it. But here's the thing, guys. It's not. It's not worth it. I'm sure there are lots of you here today that can testify to the reality of holding on to unforgiveness and how it will mess you up way worse than it'll mess anybody else up. Now, I want you to know, we read this part of Matthew, and I didn't dive into it because I know I wouldn't have time, but we read that part of Matthew where Jesus talks about offenses toward others and woe to those. There is an impact of unforgiveness on others, absolutely, okay? But you will feel the brunt of that impact. And it will be the ripple effect will be with you longer than it will be with anyone else. All right? And the enemy would love to convince you that you were wronged in such a way that if the Lord doesn't let you stay mad, then there's a problem with him. There is nothing worth breaking connection with the Lord. There is nothing worth that, okay? Because he can bring the kind of healing, the kind of wholeness that no I'm sorry will bring you, okay? And I probably didn't do a good job specifying this, but I want you to know we're not just talking about forgiving others. We're talking about forgiving yourself too, okay? The same things apply. And that deception is the same with ourselves. The longer we allow the enemy to convince us that forgiving ourselves is somehow a step in the wrong direction, the longer we allow the connection between ourselves and the Lord to be disrupted, and it's not worth it. And this forgiveness is, it's a tough thing to talk about, but it is something that I really want to encourage you to dive more into, okay? Let the truth of his word purify your heart with regard to how we deal with forgiveness. And let it be something that we rely on him to accomplish. Please, don't try and do it on your own. That's not what I'm saying. Get with the Lord, and he can heal your heart to make it supernaturally possible for you to forgive those who have wronged you. Because that exists, okay? And I know sometimes we hear, like, oh, you just got to get over it, or you just got to let it go, or like, listen, nobody knows the things you've dealt with, all right? Nobody knows how you've been wronged. Nobody has the right to tell you to get over anything, okay? I'm not telling you to get over anything. What I'm telling you is do not disrupt your connection with the Lord. That's not worth it.